What's coming off around here?
If you guys playing railroad anymore today, there's a landslide, a new cut.
Hi, and welcome to Fun with HO Scale Stuff. In this episode, this is episode number 15, I want to share some information pertaining to trolleys, and in particular, my HO scale 8-window Brill trolley. So you might ask, why trolleys? And I just happen to have one, and I guess that kind of motivated me to include it in one of my episodes. And this little thing is reminiscent of years gone by when cities were basically served by trolleys on the streets. They had the tracks running throughout the city and a catenary overhead, and the trolleys carried all of the passengers from one point to another. It's like trolleys were also called streetcars, and in some instances they were called interurbans. The interurbans obviously were more a conveyance from one urban area to another. Locally here, that would have been a trolley that was carrying passengers between Allentown and Bethlehem. I'm not sure that they ever ran to Easton, but I have a photograph of a trolley leaving Bethlehem and coming to Allentown. But before I get to that, I just want to show a little bit of the history of trolleys, and I'm going to also suggest that maybe the diminutive little trolleys actually deserve a place on HO scale layouts. I like a lot of the HO scale layouts I've examined over years. I've not noticed, if I cannot even recall seeing a single one that incorporated trolley service within their urban areas. Of course, I realize an urban area would have been something you'd put on a much larger model of a railway, and that would include like a city, maybe a backdrop, but still, you know, I think they deserve some credit, and I'm going to give them a little bit of credit in this episode. Streetcars appeared in the large cities of the United States because these cities' populations and the size of the city itself grew so much that the increased distances across cities outstripped their citizens' walking distances. So there was a demand for conveyance to the stores or place of business by the citizens. This took place in around the early 1800s. The earliest form of streetcars were the horse-drawn tram or horse car vehicles, as shown in this image. As you can see here, that the trolleys ran on rails that were embedded in the city streets. They ran over established routes, but about that rail, the gauge of the streetcar tracks varied. That's because the U.S. did not have, the railroads didn't establish a standard gauge track until 1886, which is towards the end of the 1800s. So in these early streetcars, their gauges just varied from city to city, manufacturer to manufacturer. Also notice that because the streets weren't paved, that the rail heights were very high as by necessity, so that the rails would be above the mud and the muck and the horse poop. The streetcars that were built had both open and closed sides, and they were basically wood side or wood structured cabs on steel frames, and it looks like steel or cast iron wheels. The other interesting feature of the streetcars at this time is that they sort of imitated the passenger cars that the railroads were using in the same period. As you note that the roof of the streetcar has a kind of protrusion which is called a clear story roof. These type of passenger cars were familiar to the customers, the people that needed conveyance from small towns throughout the countryside, as these were used on accommodation trains. And it was a really early form of mass transit for what would be called interurban transit. In the early 1880s, the DC electric motor became available. These motors were quickly applied to electric powered trolleys, which were largely appearing in the bigger metro cities such as New York, DC, San Francisco, Boston, Akron, and Philly. These electric power trolleys used a 600 volt DC power source from an overhead wire. This was picked up using a catenary boom. As you can see, this early trolley that I'm showing has the catenary boom raised, and it appears that the catenary boom is terminated with a roller, like a pulley, that tracks along the trolley wire. Look, the actual incorporation of trolleys in that period was kind of hindered because a lot of cities, the city leaderships, didn't allow the trolley companies to erect these wires all over. They nevertheless became very popular and served a great deal of customers. The trolley cars continue to serve the cities and the interurban communities up through about the 1950s. The trolley was put out of service because of two things. As you can see in the image I'm showing, the trolley just began to be a very nuisance item within the cities because of the popularity of the automobile. People were actually finding them an obstruction, and so the citizens raised their desire to have the trolleys removed. But there was a second demise for the trolleys. A company called the National City Line, which was owned by General Motors, Standard Oil, and Firestone Tires. This company purchased trolley lines that had weak financials resulting from the loss of customers as people opted to use their automobiles, and then they replaced them with buses. So you see what happens to all things that go out of service. And here's another picture showing what the demise of the trolleys amounted to. Here in the Lehigh Valley where I live, the Allentown, Bethlehem, and Easton regional area was serviced by trolleys early on. This particular trolley is shown, the one I'm showing right now, is a trolley that is departing Bethlehem and headed towards downtown Allentown. I thought it might be interesting to share a little bit of what I've been doing with this antique trolley that I acquired. As others that I have, I'm not sure when or where I got it because it's been so many years, but I did a little research on this particular model. Was sold, I believe, under the name TYCO, but it was actually built by Mantua or Matua, however you may pronounce that. It's Mantua. Apparently they were making these, they started making these 8-window Brill type trolleys. They started making them about 1953, but this series, because it has this lettering on it, there was a series that they built, same mold, again by Mantua, and it was built, it was around the early 80s that it was actually built. And I believe the mold, like I say, was the same one they used back from 50s. The antenna is broken off. Let's just take a kind of survey of what it is and what I've done. It's initially was filthy. It was actually, you could see some of the discoloration still on the hood here, but I scrubbed it with isopropyl alcohol and a paper towel, and I had taken it completely apart. There are actually images. I don't know if you can see the images like that. There are actually images of people that are printed on a piece of clear vellum, and it's inserted into a little slots here, and it's on both sides. I had to clean that as well. It was absolutely impossible to see the figures from the dirt. It was like a black soot that had built up on it from extensive use, apparently. I believe this is one I acquired from a former colleague who had been working here in Pennsylvania, had to move to Florida, and he put his home up for sale, and I had had helped him with that by taking down, he had a whole room filled with model railroad. And in exchange for me removing that from the room and getting it ready for sale, he gave me a number of those locomotives and trackage and switches, but and also cork roadbed, which I promptly put into storage at the time. And if I can recall, I think that was around 1985, 1990, somewhere around there. And of course, it stayed in storage since, till now. I took it out. And this thing, when I took it out, it didn't run. It didn't move at all. So I took it apart, as I said, and I cleaned. This was all black. I cleaned the frame. I cleaned the motor components and the brushes, and I cleaned the wheels. The wheels actually look pretty good. They're a little shiny now. So that done, I got it to run, but it's still sketchy. It doesn't run smoothly at low speeds, despite the fact that I spent a lot of time. I'll show you. Turn it on. It isn't terribly bad, but I'll run it the other way. It's a lot better than not running at all. So yeah, I'm kind of happy with that. But the model itself was really junky. For instance, if you look at the frame here on the side frame, and you can see where I believe they're called bolsters. That's where the lubricants go in for the axles. And these things are misaligned with the actual wheels. The wheels are farther apart than the molding of this piece. And it makes me wonder, and I believe I did read it somewhere, is that they took this frame off of a different model and just stuck it on this body, or well, conversely stuck this body on that frame. And that frame, I couldn't tell you what it was for, but it was definitely not for this model. And apparently they sold quite a lot of these trolleys. They're kind of cute. The other thing that I did notice was that the frame was bent. So one of the sides was bent up, and one of the screws is still missing right now. There's a screw missing right there. That screw, I have the piece I took out. It was literally broken. And it was this side of the frame that was bent. But what I did, the outcome was not just bent, it was turned a bit sideways. So I got a couple of pliers and did a little bending and got it straightened out. And I used a steel rule to check that the frame is now straight. So when it was bent, when the body was sitting on the frame, it was actually sitting on an angle. So it looked silly. I mean, it was actually like the nose front of the trolley was actually right down on the track. So it has a pretty good set now, sits nicely on the track. It runs, that's a positive. If you can get it to run, that's good, but it's still not a great model. The catenary piece, if you look online, you can see pictures of these for sale, like on eBay. You can see what the catenary looked like. It was just a piece of plastic that came up to about a year. That's about what I can tell you about this model and what I've been doing with it. But I'd like to, just wanted to share that with you, and I'd like to continue and actually show some progress on building my service yard on the platform. The benchwork was built previously, and I've got foam on it, and I set up some models up there to take some perspective of the space I have available. But what I need to do is to make cardboard mock-ups of the equipment that I plan to install for the service facility. And then I'm going to place it. And I've already got something of an idea of how I want the landscape to look when I finish it. So that's another little bit of a challenge I've got ahead of me, is to put up a backdrop on the benchwork. And I'm pointing up this way because the benchwork's sitting right there. But the benchwork needs to have a backdrop that I can build some of the scenic materials up to the back of it and sculpt in a sort of a rise. And What I wanted to do was have an abrupt drop that falls down to where where the service facility actually runs. In that, I'm going to use on the backdrop a certain area where there'll be a pond, a man-made pond, something dammed up, and then I'll have piping coming over to the water supply to pump, a little pump house over at the dam, and it'll be supplying the water for the steam locomotives. The Lehigh Valley Terminal Railroad is the name of my model railroad, and it's going to be a steam, early diesel era type railroad. I've been getting a lot of push from Dan Thorne. He's really upset with me that I haven't got the service yard built yet. So to save myself from being chewed out anymore, I'm going to set about getting that started right now. Well, that's all I have for this presentation on trolleys. I hope you found this information interesting. If by chance any of you also have a trolley either in your collection or better running on your model railroad, please leave a comment on its scale, manufacturer, and type. I'm curious to know about other modelers' interest in streetcars or interurban operation. If you have anything you would like to add or correct, please do not hesitate to add that in the comments below. And thank you so much for watching this video.